Convene our meeting. Thank you, everybody, for allowing us to take a break. We will start with R5 Administrative and Board Supervisors reports. Mr. Lees.
Thank you, Chairman Modi, members of the board. I do want to give a quick report. I have not recently, and I want to just bring up a state budget update and let you know that obviously we're watching the election very close today. We already have a conference call. I have a conference call with Sacramento tomorrow at 11 o'clock, and that will be based on what happens or does not happen as a matter of the election. And so we'll know a little bit more information next week. Certainly there are some things that could have a financial impact on Shasta County and the services that we provide, so we'll continue to watch that without getting into any election discussion. I want to share with you, I was speaking with a couple of directors this morning, and the couple cities, two of the cities that had claimed bankruptcy, which was a few years ago, or a couple anyways, Stockton and Vallejo, when they claimed bankruptcy, they elected to continue with their PERS premium. Well, those other businesses and bankers that were a recipient of the bankruptcy notices called foul, and they actually sued the city saying, wait, if you're bankrupt, everybody gets cut, even PERS. And so they are challenging that in court, the fact that a government entity can pick and choose who they're going to claim bankruptcy with. So that, as that's being challenged, the city of San Bernardino filed bankruptcy, the city of Mammoth has, and now there is another city that will be, that I'm not going to say publicly, but it will be announcing shortly. Those cities have quit paying, as part of the bankruptcy, not only quit paying other bills, they quit paying their PERS premium. So they too are being sued. Now they're being sued by PERS saying, no, you need to keep paying our premiums and forget about everyone else. So the best situation and best place to be in is not claim bankruptcy.
Thank you.
And so the reason I say that is you're going to continue to find me watching the expenses very closely and making sure that we're not spending money we don't have. And I share that with you because, again, based on what we find with the election, there can be an opportunity for significant cuts to be rolled back to counties. And I don't want to be a pessimist on how the economy is going, because I really believe the economy is coming back. The problem is, and you've heard me say this before, is that 4 years ago, we, Shasta County, made significant cuts to roll in our spending, so we didn't spend money we didn't have, the state did not, and so they still have this $1 billion gap, like $26 billion gap that they keep pushing forward, and that's why they're in the trouble they are, because the economy is starting to come back just a little bit. So we'll continue to watch it, and my purpose for speaking this morning is just to let you know we are watching it, we are on top of it, but it doesn't mean we will not have to come back here shortly and make some adjustments in our budget projections. That's all I have.
Well, I think the entire board is of one mind when it comes to not spending money we don't have, and I think that's been our direction from the very beginning, and we recognize that we need to keep our county on good, solid financial footings. And to that matter, I just would throw out one comment about we were spending monies on a lawsuit. I need to remind the public that we're not suing that individual. He's suing us. We're defending the lawsuit. So.
Yeah, and actually what happened was he is the one that initiated the lawsuit by filing a lawsuit with Shasta County. We did not initiate this legal action.
So we're spending money we have to spend
because
we're
to defend ourselves. Yes.
Okay.
And then the second item relates to the SRA fees. This board had asked to send a letter, and this was actually a few months ago, and this relates to the fire area fees. We sent a pretty strong letter a few months ago, but then there became an opportunity for public comment, to receive public comment, and so this board directed us to go forward with having our comments on record during the official public comment period of this fee, and so that's what this letter is. So I'd look for consensus in having us go forward to sending these comments in, so we get them in on time.
Thank you, Chair Modi. I think this letter certainly captures the thinking of the board, and I'm going to move approval of that, but I also would like to mention something else.
Second. Been moved and seconded to send this letter forward. I will just say under discussion that I got my notice in the mail, so obviously they've got to Shasta County now.
So did we.
Yeah. So, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Mr. Kehoe.
Thank you, Chairman Modi. Mr. Lees and I attended a workshop last week that was presented by our local state elected officials discussing this very matter. And we have brought for your consideration some background information answering such questions as, why did I receive a bill from the state fire prevention? What is the state responsibility area? And it lists a lot of things here. This is available for you. The second thing we have is a petition for redetermination if you in fact did receive these bills, and if you want to have any chance of recovering money, then you need to file this. And they list here the reason for the petition, and the reason is on the second page of this information. So I will give this material to the clerks. Perhaps you could set it back there, and then anyone in the audience that wants this information can do so.
Well, is that the only copy?
We'll make copies.
No,
of
I
it.
have copies made.
Thank you, Mr. Kehoe.
Thank you.
Mr. Lees, you had something else?
Yes, and just one other item, as it relates to the budget and being prepared, I want to, you could talk about how good we think we are, but I think when we use real examples, it helps. And you know that we took some steps to broaden our services in picking up the housing authority for Siskiyou counties, Modoc counties, Trinity counties, and we're continuing to do more of that in different areas. But a perfect example of that is when Tehama County's Child Support Services building burnt down here a couple months ago. They went to work one day, and the next day they had no place to provide any services at all. With a flip of a switch, they were up in Shasta County, and we had actually put all their people back to work that wanted to be there, providing services for Tehama County here in Shasta County. We have now the flexibility, the technical ability to, and the buildings, the physical, to do things like that, and we're creating quite a reputation with the state as the go-to county in the Northern California when they need help. And because of that, the Board of Supervisors from Tehama County sent a very nice thank you note recognizing our support in helping them. And so we'll continue to grow that type of the business. So that's all I have.
Well, I think you need to clarify that when we're helping the other counties, Siskiyou, Modoc, and stuff with the housing, those things, that we're not, again, we're not spending money we won't have. We're receiving monies to administer those programs from the feds.
Correct.
So what we're doing is we're helping them save money because they don't have the resources to carry out the mission, but we can. But we're being compensated for doing that and still giving them what they need in their counties.
Correct. We're not using any local dollars to supplant them.
Okay, we will start with Supervisor Haas today. Thank you.
Nothing to comment on today.
Supervisor Hartman.
Thank you. I'd just like to comment that I attended the RAND board meeting last week, and I have the information upstairs for whoever would like to see that, and I have the minutes from the last several meetings, so one of you can think about taking over that position the next January meeting. Thank you.
Supervisor Baugh.
Thank you, Chair Modi. Along with Mr. Lees, I attended the Salvation Army Red Kettle Kickoff, and once again we have challenged the City of Reading employees in opposition or against the Shasta County employees to see who can raise the most money. I just tell you, this is a friendly competition. The real winners are the Salvation Army and the use of their resources for the public good. I guess I'll just leave it at that. Larry's looking at me if I'm going to say anything more, but I always enjoy the friendly competition between Mr. Starman and myself. Also attended on behalf of Shasta County and presented certificates to 3 worthy recipients at the Shasta County Citizens Advocating for Respect event last Friday. In addition, representing the board, I attended the Nortec Governing Board and WIB meeting last week, where I was appointed chair of the governing board. Activities continue This is the board that supplies finances to the Smart Center in Shasta County that also operates on behalf of Siskiyou County and for the 11 counties in the member organization. Attended a meeting of PSA 2, and that's keeping our senior dollars in balance, supplying finances for food to the senior nutrition counties in the 5-member county area. Attended 2 oversight board meetings, and I can't help but comment that the exercise, at least from this participant's perspective, is an exercise in futility. It's another layer of paperwork that's been added. This is the oversight board for the Anderson Southwest Redevelopment Agency. There are no extra dollars there to go back to the state of California. In fact, there are no dollars there to pay for the activities of the audits for the oversight board. Yet, we're producing more paperwork to send to the state of California. Schools will not benefit from that one, at least from the Anderson board. Also attended as auctioneer for the West Valley Volunteer Fire Company. This is a small but mighty volunteer fire group. The auction went very well. The chili feed was tremendous. Appreciate the members of the public that came out in support of it. I just want to say, as a way of thank you to all of the volunteer agencies in Shasta County, especially our firefighters. Thank you.
Thanks, Supervisor Baugh. And I attended, along with Supervisor Baugh and Supervisor Haas, the Shasta Regional Transportation Agency meeting we had a couple weeks ago. Attended the Cattlemen's Association meeting. They had a representative from the Siskiyou County area talking about the issues they're doing as far as fighting the state over the water rights up there and their ability to use water out of the Siskiyou and Shasta rivers. It was very interesting to see some of the issues that they're facing, the amount of money that's being spent on lawsuits. And then attended the Senior Celebrity Soup Kitchen with, I know there were other representatives from the county that were there. We were on different shifts, so it's hard to tell who was there and who wasn't at different times. Supervisor Kehoe and myself and Mr. Lees attended the vet stand down in Anderson to see, again, the services that were being provided to veterans. And one thing was very interesting note during our tour was we talked to an individual who was providing haircuts to the veterans, and he himself was a homeless vet a year prior to that and had attended the stand down and received some services, got connected to the right people, he actually was a surgical nurse, I think, in the Army, but he got retrained and is doing was he not just a barber? I found that out. He was, anyway, he was very proud of the fact that, yeah, he was able to get back on his feet and then come back and offer his services for free for veterans for this year. So it was a kind of moving story. As we know, a couple of our department heads, Charlie Haas and Martin McKenzie, were both retiring. We attended their events and very well turned out for both of those people in honoring their services to our county. And then finally, I attended the CSAC's presentation of the realignment conference along with our sheriff and our probation chief, Martin McKenzie, Don Ewert, and some of the other staff from those departments last week to look at what's out there, what's available, what's being done, what's working, what isn't. I have some material available upstairs for those who want to look at it further, but it was a good chance to see what the state's been facing and what they're trying to accomplish and moving forward with realignment.
Mr. Modi?
Yes, sir, Mr. Keogh.
Given the lateness of the hour, I'm going to defer my remarks until our next meeting. I know many in the audience here are for R6, so I'll make a report at our next meeting.
Did I skip you? My apologies. Mr. Kehoe?
He already did some.
Yeah, you always say. Actually, go right ahead. Please do. My apologies.
Pass.
Well, I mean, you didn't do anything then, huh?
Oh.
Okay, you got me on that one. Okay, we're going to take the following action. We receive a report from the Director of Resource Management and the Sheriff on the Shasta County Code section involving medical marijuana cultivation and its impact on Shasta County.
Thank you, Chairman Modi and members of the board. I'm going to kick this off, if I might, and then we will hear from our Resource Management Director, Mr. Russ Mall, following which we'll hear from the Sheriff, and then also, of course, we're inviting comments from the public to provide input on this very important topic also. As you know, a little over a year ago, we actually created an ordinance to help confine or at least regulate that which we thought was to be legal. And of course, there's still challenges going on throughout the state on both sides, and it's a very fluid process. But we determined what we thought would be workable here in Shasta County. And I've taken the opportunity with my team, meeting with the law enforcement team, district attorney's office, determining what's worked, what hasn't worked. And today, we're going to come back and I'm going to make a couple recommendations as to what we think might help improve our enforcement of this issue. Again, recognizing that it can change in a phone call just because the laws are changing as court decisions are being made. So we're watching that portion of it very close. We can say this, that we were, I believe, and I will recede for this, that we were not prepared for the amount of impact that this would have. And by say this, I mean the change in the federal's enforcement policy, the federal government's enforcement policy. We are very successful. I do believe the ordinance is still a good ordinance, and I would like to see us continue with that same ordinance intact with some minor adjustments. I don't know that we've given it a fair chance. The problem was really the resources to enforce it and some of the parameters that we had in place. If you go to page 2 of the board report, you see that I'm recommending, and again, this was in consultation with the district attorney's office, resource management, and the sheriff. But one of the things, we've had very few abatements in the past that we have not been able to get, at least to get compliance and or take care of that within a reasonable period of time. Well, that reasonable period of time does not work in this scenario, to where if you wait 3 or 4 months, the problem's over and then you have to start over. And so we're looking to make sure that one of the items that we're looking at is to reduce the amount of time, streamline that abatement process so that rather than 30 days and 60 days, still trying to make sure that we stay within the law and due process, but move that time in as quickly or as short as possible. Typically we don't set abatement hearings until we have a need to set them. Well, that sometimes takes 30 days in itself. So the recommendation is setting those abatement hearings today. I mean, going ahead and saying, okay, on June 15th, we're going to have a hearing. On June 30th, we're going to have a hearing. On July 15th, go ahead and set the hearings today. If we find that we don't need to have one, we could always cancel it. But pre-scheduling them will mean that we're ready to go if we have any infractions as it relates to the compliance and our ordinance. So that's one of the things I would like to recommend that we implement. We cannot skirt the issue of looking for additional funding for resources. And let me tie 2 and 3 together. Use peace officers for compliance checks. It can be, and we have to treat it as such, a very dangerous situation. And it's not, I will say it is not typical for our compliance officer from resource management to put themselves in this type of harm's way as it relates to their normal function. With that said, we always, in this case, tried to line them up with peace officers so that there was not only strength in numbers, but we had safety having deputies along with the ordinance compliance checks. With that being said, we know that we've only got one compliance officer. We know that we need additional compliance officers because the need is greater. But in talking again with resource management, with the sheriffs, we have all come to the conclusion that these compliance officers actually should be deputies. I mean, they should be the ones doing that. That way we don't have to have dual resources out there. We've got those out there that are actually trained in these type of situations to make sure that no one additional gets into harm's way. Now, with that being said, we don't have the deputies today to do that. So I don't want to mislead you to think we're just going to hand it off to Sheriff Pasenko and call it good, because we do not have the deputies to do that. So we still have the second component of that, which is additional funding for resources. And I have a recommendation for that I'll be making. The next one is to maximize the assessment and collection of administrative fines. You know, in the cases we're finding, and I won't be real specific, but just in generalities, I will say, you know, some of these folks, it appears, are making a substantial amount of money. And in that case, when you say, we're going to fine you $50 if you don't do this, they don't really care. And so we need to put a little more teeth into what the fines are going to be, the penalties are going to be. And then, and we've got some recommendations around that. And then the abatement proceedings themselves, if there happens to be a nuisance abatement issue, an ordinance violation, but also a criminal portion, because they're outside what the law as we know it today says, we don't have to wait for the ordinance to go through the process and then go for the criminal. We're recommending that we do both simultaneously, so they're both going through the process in the same track, so we can get a resolution in a more timely manner. Those are some things that I believe will help us do a better job of enforcing our ordinance. And those are the recommendations that we have come to as a conclusion. Now, with that being said, I'm going to stop there for a minute and ask Russ Mall, our Resource Management Director, to provide some insight and the working knowledge of what he actually in his department went through, and then we'll have Sheriff Basenko speak. Then.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Russ Mull, Director of Resource Management. What I'm going to do is I'm just go through what we did this past summer in terms of the numbers, so that you can kind of get a feel. Sheriff Basenko, I believe, has some slides also that he's going to show. We have, since we started doing this program, since we've adopted the ordinance, we've received 207 complaints. And of those 207, we've opened 167 files. And the remaining ones were ones that were outside our jurisdiction in one of the cities or maybe in another county. 100 violations were investigated. 11 were found to be in compliance with the county ordinance. 14 had no grows that were found. 18 grows were cited with fines and notices to appear. 22 were referred to the county council for abatement. 8 came into compliance after receiving notice of abatement. 12 have requested hearings. And we have spent, with our one person, essentially full-time since May of this year. Now, in following up on some of Mr. Lee's comments, my observation about this program is that with unlimited resources, you can probably get a pretty good handle on this. There's a significant change that has occurred that you'll probably hear some more about, in that a lot of these grows are people that have come here from other states, and they're on private property as opposed to what has traditionally been mostly public lands. Historically, when there was asset seizures, you didn't want this stuff on your property because they'd take your property if they caught you. But now, because of the medical marijuana issue, this is all moving onto private lands, or a lot of it's moving onto private lands. And along with that comes all the rights afforded to private property owners. That's the one thing that I don't think we fully realized when we got into this. The nuisance abatement process really works well. And we've used it now for maybe 20 years in cleaning up property, but it assumes a limited or unlimited amount of time to do it. In other words, they're not going to go anywhere with 7 miles of junk. It's going to be there tomorrow. Now, the marijuana grows, they're going to plant in spring and they're going to harvest in September. If your process can't be finished before that, you're wasting your time. They're gone. And so what we ran into is that, yes, we can go out and look at them. Yes, we can do a good job of documenting this and all of those things, but the process isn't fast enough to get to where it actually has an impact on the growers. And that's why Larry talks about expediting the process. And I think that's probably the biggest thing, is that in the near future, the county council has committed to trying to figure out if we can expedite the process. I think the DA has taken a look at that issue. If you can't expedite the process, you can send 1,000 people out there to look at these things. But if you can't get them before they harvest the product, you're just wasting your time. The other thing that Mr. Lease talked about, our code enforcement person, essentially, when they started working on this, quit working on all other code enforcement. And we kind of patched that all together from the other folks in the department. The county only funds one code enforcement officer full-time. And so we get about anywhere between 300 and 600 complaints a year in normal code enforcement. And we just essentially set most of those aside while we worked on the marijuana. The additional problem with that was that our guy had to essentially have a sheriff with him every time. And so instead of just one person going out and looking at it, you had 2 or 3 going out every time. And we pretty much determined that if we're going to do that, we don't need to be sending our guy out. If you're going to send a sheriff out anyway, you might as well just send a sheriff out and train him to do this. So that falls to the recommendation to have sworn personnel do the marijuana follow-up. Kind of a final analysis from our part, or from my part, I guess, is that if you're going to do this correctly, it's going to take quite a bit of resources. You need to decide if that's the priority. I mean, we look at these things all the time, and clearly the federal government has done us a dirty deed here. There's no question about it. And the state hasn't been much better. This is a problem in every single county in the state, unless it's too hot or too cold to grow. And this problem is really not going to be solved unless there's some state or federal changes, either some guidance or some initiative by the federal government. I mean, I think we can do an adequate job. I think the recommendations will provide for an adequate program, but you need to be realistic about whether you're actually going to solve the problem. We haven't solved the problem in 40 years or whenever it started. And so you need to make sure that you take into perspective just how realistically we can deal with the likely thousands of folks that are out there growing in various capacities. I'll let Tom give you all the positive news. And
I have a question for Mr. Mull.
Mr. Mull? Mr. Mull?
Yes, sir.
Supervisor Ball has a question for you.
Just one question. You mentioned 207 complaints received. For the benefit of the public, could you also let us know the number of outstanding code enforcement cases that you already are carrying?
Well, I think about 300.
Plus 300?
Plus or minus 300 separate ones.
Okay.
That we typically carry at any one time.
Very good.
And most of those resolve themselves. If you keep going back to somebody with garbage or junk, typically they'll clean it up. You go back to a marijuana grower 50 times, and they're not going to cut it down until it's harvest time. Even though we do get a little bit of compliance with some of them, the fact is that they are there to grow it and they're there to harvest it. So you can visit them as long as you want. That's what they're going to do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairman Modi and members of the board. Tom DeSanco, Shasta County Sheriff. I have a brief PowerPoint with you, and I do concur with the comments of CEO Lees and the majority of the comments with Director Mull. This year, with these compliance checks for the county ordinance, we received much input from the public and staff, and the current ordinance was approved. And the ordinance does allow the growing of medical marijuana with reasonable restrictions. Last year, just during the period of time, we received 320 tips. We referred those tips also to code enforcement. We had a total of 76 cases, and some of these cases did involve other states with trafficking across state lines. Some did involve some international cases. Total, we eradicated from public and private lands a little over 40,000 plants, arrested 75 people, and seized 49 weapons and nearly $400,000 of assets. As you can see from the column on your right side of your screen, there was about 12,000, 13,000 plants taken off of public lands, but the majority was on private land. And this was a shift that we've seen developing over the last several years. It started in the Central Valley, coming out of the mountains and going on to the valley floor. We usually run about 1 or 2 years difference in time period for that same trend to come up here, and that it has arrived here. We did 11 operations with code enforcement, checked about 62 places, contacted 69 people, cited 34 of those individuals, and that was only through July 19th because we were trying to do our other public lands marijuana operations as well. Out of these compliance checks, we ended up arresting about 7 people and seized 3 weapons there. Those people that were arrested are going through the criminal process because they were outside the scope for medical marijuana law, and they're being criminally prosecuted and working with the district attorneys on those cases. The complaints that we had about 176 violations. 20 are in the other process of becoming violations, and the complaints received was actually in some 15 complaints were either in the city of Reading or the city of Anderson, which we referred to those entities for their enforcement actions, and 11 complaints which cannot be processed due to incomplete information. These are just some of the photographs that are around the county for this year, and these are on private lands and that were falling under the guise of medical marijuana. And last year I advised you the magnitude of the problem and the limited staffing and resources. There is only 1 code enforcement officer for the entire county for all of code enforcement, and very limited funding for the sheriff's office. My staff receives the majority of its funding from the federal government for illegal marijuana enforcement, which is limited to public lands and not private. And you've seen some of the other ones. This was in the Big Bend area. Over the past years, they're all very similar. We have some that are moving, as I said, from the public land down to private lands to grow behind the veil of Proposition 215. And we're not talking really about personal need. These inspections that we made, the vast majority of them were way out of compliance with the land use ordinance. These are some basically commercial operations, and as such, if they're outside the scope, they do require quite a period of time to do an exhaustive investigation to be able to either seize their assets or do criminal prosecutions with them. People are moving here from out of the county and out of state. Some are purchasing property, some are leasing property. They are doing, in some cases, a fair amount of environmental damage. One of them is called timber conversion, which is basically clear-cutting the land illegally, doing erosion problems there, and then they'll walk away from their lease agreement, leaving the landowner holding the environmental damage. There's terracing, diversion of water streams, springs, that causes a huge amount of this damage as well. From the start of the growing season, code enforcement was really not engaged or somewhat unresponsive, and I think part of that was due to the lack of understanding of the magnitude of the problem in Shasta County, and then of course only having 1 officer there. My staff received the bulk of the complaints, which were averaging over 10 per day, about 100 per week, and then we were forwarding those to code enforcement as well because they're the primary agency for that. And these complaints were received via email, phone, and letters. And you also received many of the complaints as well from concerned citizens and your constituents. And nearly all the complaints appeared to be ordinance-oriented and related to, all of them were forwarded to code enforcement. In the early part of the season, code enforcement went out and my staff cited a number of individuals for the criminal part of it, which is an infraction, and you need multiple violations before you can declare a nuisance if you're going on the criminal side of the part of the ordinance. But at that time, code enforcement did not take action, And then after much encouragement from myself and several meetings with the CEO, the department heads, and county council, we were able to make some progress. But by that time, there were already scores and scores of reports of the large operations, complaint of the small, strong, and irritating smell of the marijuana, of the budding plants, loud generators running, lights for more aptly security around their grow sites, and of course, vehicle and foot traffic, and more problems that were in violation of the county ordinance. Despite the multitude of complaints and land use ordinances, there was very limited action from code enforcement, but again, that does go with the limited amount of resources. There is certainly, and I understand the safety concern, as Mr. Lees explained, the code enforcement officer for the county is not a peace officer, and that person is a civilian and is not armed. We have recovered firearms from these growing operations, and there is a concern, especially as it gets close to harvest time, of the growers protecting theirs. We've had some shootings this year and some drug rip-offs, and we don't want to see any of our staff or our county team members get hurt in the enforcement of this ordinance. Right now, there are really no budgeted funds within the sheriff's office for the enforcement of this ordinance. Nearly all these incites were far exceeding the ordinance requirements, with multiple violations on each. It was a little bit slow in getting some of these cases to county council. Part of that comes with code enforcement developing the investigation, the report writing style to present this. We were familiar with it since we've done marijuana operations for 20, 30 years. The abatement proceedings were set for December, and as was explained earlier, that's well past the harvest time, and that's not going to get the compliance that we're needing. And it was long past that. Next year, I think the problem of these grow sites will be amplified again. And if the ordinance is to be of value, it needs to be enforced. And in order to be enforced, there has to be adequate staff and resources that have to be dedicated to properly address the issue, and have the abatement proceedings must take place before harvest time. And as you can see from some of these are huge amounts and hundreds of plants in some cases of basically commercial operations that have been going under the guise of Prop 215. The laws are unclear. There are a number of court cases that are still waiting on their decision, as Mr. Lees explains, and it could change at a moment's notice. So we are still here to work with code enforcement, protect our citizens, serve the county, and try and work on getting compliance with this ordinance. That concludes my presentation. Do you have any questions?
Supervisor Hawes.
How much of this do you think is exported out of the state?
I would say the majority of it is based on my contacts with my staff and federal ones. California is the marijuana nation, or the marijuana capital, to ship to the other states that it's illegal. In some cases, on the black market retail side, they can get $10,000, $11,000 per pound, and then on the wholesale side, $2,000 to $3,000 per pound. Recently, it was in the paper, I believe today, that somebody was intercepted from Fall River Mills in Oregon with a number of poundage in Oregon. Oregon state troopers arrested him, and then he was also in possession of prescription medication for drug trafficking.
Supervisor Kehoe.
Thank you, Chairman Modi. Thank you for the presentation, Sheriff Pacinko. Can you put this in perspective for us? How many plants approximately are growing in Shasta County? How much product is there?
In reality, and I'm not being facetious nor sarcastic, but it is probably easier. I gave an invitation to all the board members or the CEA to take a flight during the grow season. In reality, it's probably easier to spot where it is not growing versus where it is growing. It is in our neighborhoods, it's in the rural areas, and as I said, it's moved out of the forest down onto the valley floor. There is a ton of complaints of my next door neighbor is growing, and it's 95, 100 plants or more, and then they're spread out in locations. So it is a huge problem throughout the county.
Huge problem.
Any estimate on product, amount of product?
You're talking hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of plants. A few years ago, just eradicating marijuana out of the public lands, we were into the 300,000 or 400,000 mark, and we could only get to 20%, 25% of the tips we received. We run out of time because we don't have all the resources. So I would say safely, in reality, it's probably more into the millions of plants that are in the county, countywide, that we really can't get to when they're all in peak growing season. We had reports of water thefts from the Jones Valley area. The new water system was put in where water trucks were filling up multiple times a day from the new system out there. One concern was from, I spoke to Director Minturn, that if the stealing of the water is obviously not good, but if they improperly shut the fire hydrant off with a reverberation, can cause tens of thousands of dollars of damage to the piping system that's underground. There were also water truck drivers that were paying for their water out of the Clear Creek Water District that was trucking the water to the Trinity Alps Preserve and to other places and making basically a water run to the growers there that were paying them $300 to $400 a water drop to water their plants. So it is a huge problem here in the county.
Supervisor Baugh?
Thank you, Chair Modi. While it might actually sometimes appear to be humorous with the number of plants that are growing here, it obviously far exceeds the need for medical marijuana in Shasta County. That's a statement that probably doesn't even need to be said. The thing that I think hits home, Sheriff, and the public may or may not be aware of unless you have a significant number of grows in your neighborhood, is we have residents that report on a weekly basis. I'll give an example without giving you an area, as I don't want to expose them to any more potential harm than necessary. But a longtime resident within my district has lived in the same home, in the same neighborhood for over 30 years. 6 new tenants in the property surrounding them put a gate across what is a private road, so they could actually do that. We don't have the ability to remove it. Walking around with guns and threats and innuendo if you report it. Now, of course, anybody that's lived in their home for that many years is what, a senior citizen, aren't they? This is not an exception any longer. We have people who are, in my mind, I would actually class them as paramilitary, armed and determined to defend not their medical marijuana need, but their financial future. And that's the challenge. This has become an industry in neighborhoods, and that's what we have to find a path forward to. The ordinance was designed to allow a medical marijuana need. Unfortunately, it is, as the sheriff has pointed out, it is a defense for growing and making a profit. And that's the frightening part of it for me. We have to be able to assure our neighbors that they're safe.
Supervisor Ball, you definitely hit the nail on the head there, and as you saw from the first cover slide, there was a number of weapons there. Assault rifles and a assault-type tactical shotgun there, and those are just some of the weapons that we recovered from these sites.
I do have a number of people who want to speak, but we'll finish up with Supervisor Hawes.
Well, I'm sure that we're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars worth of product here, and they're not paying 1 penny worth of tax on all of this. And then it's not just here in Shasta County. We go to Trinity, we've got it all around us.
It is
It's the whole northern.
replicated
Yeah.
throughout the state of California, whether it be from San Diego County up to Modoc County. The problem has been in Trinity County for many, many years, and that problem is expanding, as well it is here in Shasta and Siskiyous.
Yes.
Thank you, Sheriff. If you have other questions, we'll get you back up here. Okay, I have some requests to speak. We'll start with Betty Cunningham, followed by Gerald Aldridge. And Mr. Aldridge, if we could have you start moving towards,
You have to start early to move over here. Thank you very much for allowing us the time today. My name is Betty Cunningham. I'm the Director of Shasta County Chemical People. I'd also like to thank you for looking and coming up, following through with your medical marijuana cultivation ordinance. It's very important to find out whether it's working. As you can see, the debate about marijuana continues, but there is one point that everyone generally agrees on, that kids should not have access to marijuana. There are many popular myths about the so-called harmlessness of marijuana, but we know from research that marijuana use is risky for teens at a critical time in their lives. Okay, normally I read the statement, but I'm going to take a few minutes because we talked about what you're seeing. We came to you, a couple of you, to the Planning Commission and then to you, tried to tell you that this was a huge problem. We're back again to say the same thing. I think you have realized what a big problem it is. I talked to you about increasing fines, that $100 is nothing to these people, and we were told by County Council that that can't happen because it's a nuisance abatement. As I was putting this together, I looked back at what I do and what my organization does, and in 2013 we will be 30 years old. Everybody's talking about ages up here. I'm not going to tell you how old I am, but that's a large part of my life, and I've been doing this for 30 years. That's 27 Red Ribbon campaigns, 20 Sober Grad campaigns. In the nation, we have seen changes in underage drinking. We've seen reduced underage drinking. We have seen reductions in DUIs and saving lives. In that 30 years, I've seen a lot. I've seen faces up here, different faces over the years, over 30 years, from county council all the way through. Maybe not there, but I have seen a lot of different faces up here. Worked with a lot of different department heads. When we started, Steve Carlton was the DA. Guess what? What goes around comes around. He's the DA again. I want to tell you, I have never in that 30 years from my heart seen what I'm seeing today with our young people. They are using marijuana more and more. We have more access to it. You see the production. I'm sorry that the buck stops here. I'm sorry that you are the demarcation line, but local communities all across this nation are the demarcation line. You have to continue to make those kinds of decisions. I know money is short. I know you're between a rock and a hard place, but you are our only defense right now. You are our only defense to keep the production of marijuana down and keep it out of reach of our children. You are their future, and I said that for 30 years, but I have never meant it more. Thank you.
thank you. If I can have you just kind of hold your applause. I know you guys are appreciative of our speakers, but we have a lot of speakers to get up here. Mr. Aldridge, followed by Kathy Grindstaff.
Yes, I live in the Shingletown area in Christie Creek Lane and that area there, and I'm speaking for 6 families in about a 1-mile area of the county. First of all, we'd like to thank Supervisor Baugh, Sheriff Basenko, and Josh Lowry from the DA's office for their help and their efforts in trying to help us. Unfortunately, their help didn't really create that much of a inroad into the marijuana grows. There are 7 grows within a mile radius of our area. There was one that was taken out from a group that had bought land that came from LA to grow marijuana. These people did not respect anything in the way of people's land or like that. They dug up the wild horse sanctuary's pond. They blocked a road that has access for all of us as a second way to get out in case of fire, and fortunately they were taken out. However, there are 6 others, we found one after all of these were turned in, that do not in any way meet the regulations that you have set forth. They do not have a legal residence. They do not have a fence. They do not have setbacks. They have, one area has a well that was put in without permits, has a septic area that was put in without permits, and also a road that was graded without permits. Also, they are living in RVs, which is illegal because we are in HP 40, Habitat Protection 40. We submitted complaints, I would say probably in the neighborhood of 15 to 20 total between the 7 families that were involved. We did get some reaction, but in most of the cases, we didn't get the reaction that we were hoping for. One of the things that is very serious is the water problem. One of the growers has blocked Christie Creek, so Christie Creek does not flow down. But one of the other ones has basically done the same thing to the other creek that's in our area, and as a result, there is just no, there's nothing to stop them. We've turned it into the Department of Fish and Game. We've turned it into the public office to Mr. Olson and other people like that. Our suggestion is, and Mr. Lease basically hit on it, I know I'm out of time.
If you just could finish up.
But we think that if you can't produce an ordinance that can be effectively enforced, that you should forget the ordinances at all because they're not doing any good.
Thank you, Mr. Aldridge. Kathy Grindstaff, followed by Dennis Owen.
Supervisors, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Kathy Grindstaff. I'm the project director for a Sobering Choice Coalition, and I'm here representing our coalition and members of the community. I also had a prepared speech, and I'm going to have to deviate too. Larry Lees brought up the subject that we are the go-to county when we talk about helping other counties. We are now becoming the go-to county for growing marijuana, and at some point, we have to find the resources to fight this because we will continue to be that go-to county. I have grandchildren. I am so sick of people telling me, well, just legalize it, just tax it. I'm sorry, I just don't think this is the normal. This should not be the normal for our children. There's scientific research showing that it lowers IQ, that it brings on lung problems. These affect our children, and I am so tired of everyone thinking that this is our new normal, because it's not. We can't blame the federal government. We can't blame the state government. We are the ones that have to take control and make a change and stick with it. Sheriff Basenko needs help. Let's give him some help. Let's find the help. I am tired of the marijuana people being in my face and thinking they're the ones with all the rights and they can do whatever they want. We need to make a difference. The city of Arcata came up with an idea to start charging extra utility taxes for people that have these large grows within their homes. There are so many ideas out there that we can develop to get the funds to fight this problem. And we want to work with you guys to help figure out a way to come up with those resources. So I deviated. Hopefully we can come up with a solution before we go through another grow season, because we know that's only a short period of time. We need to address it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Grindstaff. Dennis Owen, followed by Joanne Owen.
Morning, Madam Chairman. My name is Dennis Owen. I'm from Palisade. I'm a concerned citizen. We have a high school that's just down the street. It is being impacted severely by the kids with the grows that are in our neighborhood. We're tired of it. We're tired not of the smell. We're tired of the people that brings in. Out-of-state licenses are continually parking in our area. We know what they're there for. We need help from the county, the state, and the federal if it's necessary. I just appreciate you guys' help. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Owen. Joanne Owen, followed by Dolores Lucero.
Thank you for your time, the board. Thank you for passing the ordinances, first of all. But unfortunately, there hasn't been adequate funding for the sheriff. I mean, that's just obvious. And the grows are rampant in most neighborhoods. And there's one in particular that my husband spoke of. It's about 840 feet from the high school. How do I turn this on? Maybe I can, don't worry about it. Okay. Anyway, it's about 850 feet from the high school. And the kids look at it. The track team, I gave you some pictures. The track team runs by there every day. My major concern is the impact that it has on our children. I personally have been impacted because I have a nephew and a niece who are about to die, and marijuana is a gateway drug that leads to methamphetamines, heroin, et cetera, et cetera. And what it does to the young mind is just beyond belief. I knew it was bad before this, but I read about this many pages on the impact of youth, and it changes the pathways in the brain. It destroys sections of limbic system. They do not want to work. All they want to do is get loaded. And these sellers of so-called medical marijuana that are in the nickel every single week are making millions of dollars. We turn these guys in. He's the one on the corner that we're concerned about, and he's advertising, he's selling. He has a permit with the city that he's only supposed to be handing out information. If he's only handing out information, why is he saying prices slashed, home of the pre-rolled? And any child can get a hold of these things. That it's in all the schools. And my concern is, for every dollar that you don't spend getting this issue under control, it's going to cost you 100-fold, because Dennis and myself know of 5 people, and it's in the millions of dollars. They get loaded. They're on Section 8. They go to hospitals. They're incarcerated. All of these programs, it's 1 to 100, just in the people that we know. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Owen, and thank you for bringing this information for all of us. Dolores Lucero, followed by Cameron Frank.
Thank you. Dolores Lucero from City of Shasta Lake. That's another concern that we have in our city, the medical marijuana. But a lot of people don't use it just to use it for medical. They use it to make a living. My concerns are the public officials who have an obligation to enforce these laws, regardless of what the state and the federal are going through. We know there is the federal. You cannot override the federal. If I had an opportunity to basically say yes or no, I would basically take action regarding this issue. But my concern here is we have public officials that are supposed to do what's right for the citizens. We have, that I know, we have a couple people there. Let me back up. I had a friend who actually came to me at one time and told me that there was a police officer from the city of Redding, actually is no longer working, and he actually is a grower. And he grows up in Shingletown. He actually lives right behind the old chief of police. When I found out, I was very disappointed to know that this is going on. So I actually approached the old chief of police and asked him, is this true? Is he growing? And he said, yes. Unfortunately, he's in compliance. There's nothing we can do. Well, that friend of mine, I had that friend actually is no longer a friend of mine because I don't like to associate with people like that. He told me that the reason there's a lot of people growing in his property because they're friends. So even a police officer has people in the street growing in his property because they don't have room. So when the word gets out that we have an ex-police officers doing this, you think that a lot of people are going to care, the growers are going to follow laws? They're actually saying, well, if they do it, we can do it too. So, we need to change that because now we have, like I said before, Rose Smith, a councilwoman who is a grower representing the city. I think it's wrong. We have Tom Paseco who actually swore her in. We have public officials who are involved with these issues. And the reason I'm bringing it up because I know there is people involved. And people might not want to come up here and say it, but I will say it. I have to say it. It's my obligation as a citizen so the people will know. You need to do something about what's been going on in our county regarding the medical marijuana. We need to stop it. It's time.
Cameron Frank, followed by Robert Simmons.
Good afternoon, Chairman Modi and the rest of the board. My name is Cameron Frank, out in Shasta Lake City. I have been talking with my constituents, and what they say is, why can't we just throw them all in jail? And, the reality is, we can't do that. But like a lot of other people are saying is, well, gee, the smell, it stinks. And yeah, it does stink. And the other thing is, am I for it? No, I'm not for it. But I do know that money talks. And that's what it seems like is what's going on here. But what I do know also is that my constituents, the ones who vote for me, they are 40 and plus over. The people that are in the business of growing marijuana, they couldn't care less. And so I'm listening to my constituents, and I'm bringing this up to you folks, and what are some of the strategies that you guys are trying to implement to get, or either to reduce the, how much that they can grow. And that's what my constituents would like to know, and, they would eventually like to have it not being grown at all. But that already went to vote, and they won. So what can we do to lessen their growing of their crop? And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Frank. Mr. Simmons.
My name is Bobby Simmons. I live in Happy Valley. I think it's the marijuana capital of the world myself, just between me and you guys. I live on Pine Street in Olinda. I've lived there for since 1944, so that's quite a while ago. But I moved down the road a little bit because I built another house as I went along. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Within 400 yards of my place, I got 6 people on their property growing marijuana. 400 yards. I live less than 3/4 of a mile from the school. Okay? It's all about the buck. You know it, Glenn, you know it. It's all about, we don't have the bucks to do the job, and they're making the bucks with it. We got to find a way, instead of just kicking it in the butt and say, well, we'll get to it, is to really find a way. The sheriff hit it right on the head. We have to stop this. Because pretty quick, we're going to stop this, then we're going to be in trouble. And I mean, I'm that close, that people are coming to me and say, Bobby, we got to do something about this. You ever wake up in the morning and smell a skunk on your back porch? Any of you ever do that? Sure. Well, we do that from August to November. August to November. I have relatives come in from Texas. I got granddaughters and daughters. They can't believe we got in the back to have a barbecue. We can't do that because of the stink. And sounds like to me everybody here is having the same problem. But we're beating a dead horse unless we get off our butts and get something done. That means make that exception. Find the bucks. Can't find the bucks, grow some marijuana and sell it, then we got the bucks to do it. All right? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Simmons. That's all the requests I have for speakers at this time. Anybody else?
Yes, my name's Sylvia Milligan, and I want to thank you for allowing me this opportunity to talk. I have a little bit different side of marijuana. I'm the teacher that taught the kids that came to school who have parents that were into this type of thing. I cannot tell you how many alarm clocks I bought for students because their parents never get up in the morning to get them ready for school. And you ask them, well, how do you know what time to come to school? Don't you have a clock? No, I don't have a clock. Then how do you know? Well, when this program comes on TV, then I know it's time to go to school. You know, and they're not there, they're not consistent. So when you have a lesson plan and you're trying to teach, they show up every 2 or 3 days. They're going to be the ones in the classroom that are going to be the disturbance because they've missed what you've taught the 2 or 3 days before that all carry over, that gave them the background for what it is they're to learn today. And you ask them, well, aren't you concerned about getting education? No. Why not? Well, because I'm just going to live on welfare like my mother does or my father does. So when you look at the children's side of it, you can't blame the children. This is what they are learning from the time they are born, that it is okay to be illegal and to not get up in the morning, not have any responsibility, not be a contributing member of society, because their parents have gotten away with it all these years. It's very sad for those children because they know they're different than the rest of the kids. So they misbehave. They don't come to school. They're out on the streets. They're burglarizing your home. There's a lot of things that these kids are doing that we have no idea. A lot of us do, but some people don't. And from the kids' point of view, I hope we can do something. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Milligan. Anyone else? Okay.
Yes, please.
Well, don't make me wait.
I'm okay.
Okay.
My name is Elizabeth Healy. I'd like to thank you so much for seriously looking at this so important issue. Many months have gone by since you passed fair regulations, I'm in Palo Cedar, by the way, for allowing medical marijuana growth, regulations that would amply give someone who feels marijuana is the answer to pain management their right to grow. Unfortunately, abuse of regulations is rampant in our neighborhood, Oriole Lane and Palo Cedar. For a second season, the sophisticated grow near the corner of Lassen View Drive continues to thrive. It must be big business because now, in addition to a few surveillance cameras along their fence line, the growers have motion detectors, 8 to 10 unsightly no trespassing signs, and for several weeks now have had a tent set up with an outdoor chair and table near the gate of the grow to further protect their crop. This is on a street that has an elementary school on its north end and a high school to the south. Every day, families use Oriole Lane as their daily route to and from their workplaces or schools, and recreationally for strolls or bike rides. For another year, we have had to put up with the skunk-like, pungent stench of a mature marijuana grow, of the type of people and traffic such a grow generates, and the unsightly garbage and unused vehicles on blocks on the property. The funny thing is, in spite of all this, my property taxes are going up, as my family and I watch our lovely, quiet neighborhood slowly change into a place we no longer want to be. When my husband and I moved to Oriole Lane 11 years ago, we had great hopes of this being the place we would stay for the rest of our lives. We're now investigating other alternatives for retirement. We have family members in the Bay Area who through recent years had seriously expressed interest in buying land in Shasta County, and now we've strongly discouraged them. In the 24 years my husband and I have owned property in Shasta County, we've never missed a property tax payment, and we've been hardworking, moral, law-abiding citizens. We used to be the type of people Shasta County wanted. Now we're not so sure. Shasta County, a beautiful place that once had minimal crime and a truly blessed quality of life, is crumbling before our eyes. I'm just shocked at the additional grows this year. We are being attacked by forces without and within, all difficult to control. But the abuse of marijuana in Shasta County is something that we have to stop. Our Sheriff's Department needs help and support.
please allocate plenty of money, because it really starts there. And this is a strange thought, but can we think outside the box? How about a state of emergency, and we bring in the National Guard with flamethrowers, and we leave a couple plants for whoever lives in the house, and we just get rid of it all in one fell swoop? I don't know.
Thank you, Ms. Healy. Anybody else? All right, thank you. Back to the board. Comments?
I'd like to pose a question to Sheriff Pasenko or Mr. Mull, please. Either one. The question is this, Mr. Mull. When we look at the totality of the grows in Shasta County, how much can be attributed to medicinal marijuana grow as opposed to commercial grows?
I don't think you have any way of knowing that.
We don't.
That's like asking, how many do you think are legitimate medical problems? There's no answer to that. I think you can reasonably assume that most of the problem grows are probably commercial grows. I think the thing that we have seen is that the actual legitimate medical marijuana grows, those people actually are trying to pay attention to what the law says and are, raising their fences just this high and trying to be compliant. And frankly, those aren't the ones we're really looking for. I mean, the desire of people to eliminate marijuana from the face of the earth is not going to happen in California. The voters agreed to this medical marijuana deal, and so there is going to be medical marijuana. People who have a script, whether it's legitimate or not, can grow a certain amount that we've allowed in the ordinance, and so that's not going to go away under any circumstance. Now, whether to say they sell part of it or they don't sell part, man, I don't think you have any idea.
Okay. I have a question of Mr. Cruz.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. Mull. Mr. Cruz, in Mr. Mull's presentation, he noted the conspicuous transfer of grows from public land to private land. So will you go over for us the due process elements involved in private land as opposed to public land?
Certainly, and if I may, the Senior Deputy County Counsel David Jordan has been extensively involved in handling the medical marijuana code enforcement process, and I'd invite him to come forward to answer your question, if I may.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Keogh, the general idea of due process is giving someone a notice and opportunity to be heard. And so what was done when our ordinance was put into place was to build in a process that would allow the county to regulate the cultivation of marijuana and to provide due process and opportunity to be heard. So what we've done is the process is that code enforcement and the sheriff goes out, finds the grows that are not in compliance with the county ordinance. If they can't get compliance through the process of dealing with that person, which is part of due process, is trying to deal with the person, then they can bring the case, if you will, to the county counsel's office or the district attorney's office. We send out a notice to abate. Then they're given time to either voluntarily abate or request a hearing. If they don't request a hearing, then we can, within a time frame, take a default or set the matter for hearing and get orders that would allow us to go in and abate the property. And even within those orders, they're again given 5 more days in which to voluntarily abate the process. So that's how you meet the needs of due process by giving them notice. We can't just go in and rip it out without giving them an opportunity to come into compliance themselves. And then the process is this step-by-step process to, again, either get them into compliance or to get an order to abate and bring them within compliance.
You could characterize the difference in this way. If there is a grow on Forest Service land, and the Forest Service discovers it, they can go in and eliminate it, and that's the end of it. On private land, let me say there's a more, I hate to use the word cumbersome, but a more involved process.
There's an ordinance
Yeah.
that deals with the private property, so that within the Shasta County. And so we have to comply with those requirements. Our ordinance would not apply on the Forest Service land, so we can't, well, it'd be nice to be able to, to borrow from that and say, okay, well, let's just do the same thing as what you can do on Forest Service land. We can't do that.
Thank you.
Supervisor Hawes?
Thank you. A couple of years ago, I brought up the idea of the chemical thing, and I got really ridiculed by some people about that. But I did talk to the Ag Commissioner, Mary Pfeiffer, since then. There's no registered or no chemicals registered for the use on marijuana. And I know that growers have to use chemicals to control the bugs and so on that attack it as well. Also, if you're a farmer and you have a crop and you have weeds, and I kind of classify marijuana as weeds, you have certain registered chemicals that you can use to eradicate the weeds and grow your crop. So I hate to say it, ultimately, there's no cheaper way in the world to take care of this problem than some sort of chemical way, but it's got to be done legally. So maybe a process needs to be started to do this somewhere along the way, because it has certainly got out of control here and in a lot of other counties. And today on the ballot in some other states, there's the same, they're dealing with the same issue that we are. It could become a problem there too, which in turn could possibly lessen our problem a little. We'll just have to wait and see. This whole thing is a total mess. I agree with all of you. It's a total mess, but the answer is we don't have enough jails, enough prisons to take care of the criminals we have, let alone these. I think we're going to have to make the fines so high that they can't afford to do it. That's about the only way I can see.
Supervisor Baugh? Please. Supervisor Baugh?
Thank you, Chair Modi. I think what you've heard today is just a small sampling of the reality that's out there in Shasta County and probably many more Northern California counties. We have an ideal growing opportunity here. I'm just one supervisor. There are 5 districts, and I have fielded and had conversations with and had letters from and to and emails back and forth with hundreds and hundreds of people in my small district. The contacts, repeated contacts that result from those are the ones that you're reading about or you're seeing the statistics about from Resource Management, from the Sheriff's Department. Mr. Aldridge, where are you sitting here? In your neighborhood, there have been literally between the various code complaints that have been filed and the numbers of contacts, that alone, just in one neighborhood, amounts to hundreds. You can see the problem. It's a challenge. The bottom line, and it's pretty obvious, short of the flamethrower suggestion, the bottom line is the need for additional resources in Shasta County. So as opposed to desiring to be the go-to county for pot, I will agree with Ms. Cunningham that the buck stops with the Board of Supervisors. I would agree that we need to find additional resources for the Sheriff's Department. I would agree, this is on the basis of what can we do today. Not what do we wait for or what do we see around the corner, but what can we do today? We need to investigate additional resources. We need to follow through on every single one of the suggestions that you presented in your staff report, Mr. Lees, as to things that we can do now. I would like to add one to it. I would like to have a complete review of the ordinance to find out if there are additional areas that we can actually ratchet down and decrease the ability to grow the numbers that are there, do so on a legal basis, because the threshold for growing is the challenge. If you can grow 100 plants in your backyard and we can't do anything about it, then how do we improve the situation? And it's going downhill fast. Actually, it's gone downhill. I did take advantage of the Sheriff's Flight offer, and to find a neighborhood without pot in it was the exception. He made an accurate statement. In fact, it shocked me, some of the nicest neighborhoods, even within the city of Redding in your district, Mr. Kehoe, there are many, 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 many grows. You can see them right across the fence from each other. The challenge is there. Mr. Lee's question to you then. You alluded earlier to a path forward. You said, I have some ideas on resources. What were you referring to? I want you to write a check, sir. So.
Well, first of all, I don't believe, and if I may further define your comment about finding resources, it's not a matter of finding resource. It's not a matter of finding resources. And I believe Russ Mall, director, said it best. It's a matter of prioritizing that which we have. Okay. And so we're not going to go in the backyard and find some money. It means that we're going to reprioritize. And I do have some ideas around that. I don't want to, specifically, what I'm looking at doing is seeing if we can't utilize a change in priorities to create additional resources of at least 2 full-time deputies that would be concentrated strictly on this ordinance enforcement. So that's specifically what I'm trying to do. I don't want to say where those dollars are coming from yet.
So just to make sure that we're on the same path here, depending on the outcome of this hearing or this presentation today, you're looking for direction from the Board of Supervisors. I'll make it real clear from my perspective that I would love to see you continue with that thought process and come back to us with a plan of action that would incorporate all of these things we've talked about. Plus, I'm sure there are more from the other board members. Thank you.
Supervisor Hartman?
I want to be clear on what you need from us today, because I agree. I think these are great ideas. I agree with Supervisor Baugh's addition of looking even deeper into the ordinance. What do you need? What do we need to do today so we can move forward with?
Right. And what I'm looking for, if you look at item 2 of the staff report, under recommendation, provide directions to staff. This is exactly what I'm looking for. We tried to come with you with some ideas and recommendations that we thought were realistic and not just something to put on paper and something that we could do. So I'm looking for concurrence that you would agree with doing these things, adding anything that you don't, or say, nah, I don't want to spend the money on 2 additional resources. I'd rather do something different. This is what I'm looking for, is concurrence on our recommendations to go forward, and adding any that you might have.
Okay. And before we do that, let me just add my comments here. A question for Mr. Cruz. We have some court decisions that are out there waiting. Some happened, some haven't.
Well, we have something new happening pretty much every day. Right now, I do know that the California Supreme Court has under its review the decision as to whether or not a local agency can completely ban dispensaries, and so we'll wait to see what that goes up. More pertinent to the conversation that we're having right now, Tehama County has a decision case pending before the California Court of Appeal concerning their own local cultivation ordinance, and I think they're having an oral argument on that tomorrow, I believe, and there should be, if that occurs, unless something else happens, a decision will come out 90 days thereafter. So we may obtain further guidance after that decision. The court may say Tehama's isn't any good, and then that may impact ours. And so we may have to go back and rewrite things, or they may say it's okay, and then we can learn from that. So it is a constant state of flux, and we're continuing to monitor it on a regular basis.
And the reason I ask that is several people have commented that the buck should stop here at the supervisors, and I don't disagree with that. However, we have to live within the laws of the state of California, and so we're at the mercy of what the courts do with some of these decisions. And I think our board would like to be very restrictive on this, but again, we're facing the challenges in the courts and have to make sure that our ordinance stands that test. So I look forward to some further decisions on that. I wanted to make one comment about several people suggested from Shasta Lake City, some issues out there. Just to make it clear, our ordinance does not deal with Shasta Lake City. Our ordinance is for the unincorporated areas of the county. Shasta Lake City, City of Redding, City of Anderson can do their own ordinances. They can take care of their own problems. We don't have jurisdiction to tell them what to do in their cities. So that's to clear that up. As to the staffing, I support the idea that we give the assist to the sheriff's office. I think that's the place for it to be. I think it's unfair for Mr. Moll to have his staff deal with these issues out there with individuals who are sometimes armed. And even if it's only 5% of them that might become violent, that's 5% too many for your staff to face. However, don't be misled by the fact that we could take the sheriff's office and take his entire staff and commit them all to do nothing but marijuana eradication, and you think you would solve this problem, because it's not going to happen. There's just not enough people to do what he would have to do. You'd be in a police state, and none of us want to live in a police state. So I do agree that we need to have more effort, we need to have more direct effort, and we need to have more support for the sheriff to do that. What I would be looking for is more of going back and tweaking the ordinance as has been suggested by my colleagues to see if we can either make it more restrictive and if we can speed the process up. I'm hearing from Mr. Yorton that I'm not sure if are we bound by some of the timeframes that you threw out, or can we change those timeframes?
There's basically 3 ways to enforce our ordinance. One is by filing a lawsuit, which of course takes time, and the criminal side, which I can let the DA answer that. But what we usually do is the administrative process. And by statutes require that when a county adopts an ordinance to abate a nuisance, they do have to meet certain requirements, and the requirements are basically there's got to be notice and an opportunity to comply or be heard, have a hearing. Now, there's leeway as far as the timing in that, and our ordinance pretty much lays out just some minimum requirements and gives us great flexibility. So we're going to try to work within the confines of our ordinance and these requirements by statute of notice and opportunity to be heard to try to get something done, get in order as quickly as possible.
Now, as Mr. Lee suggested that we perhaps pre-schedule some of these hearings, can we get it down to as much as every 2 weeks?
I believe so. I mean, I think our ordinance actually imposes, I believe, has a minimum of 5 days in which to try to get things into compliance. So like we give you a notice, then you've got at least 5 days in which to get into compliance. And then there's some other dates that we have generally used by statute. So I think it's a matter of seeing how quickly we can do it. We got to work with having a case ready to go from our side, because we're the ones who basically prosecute it, and then the hearing officers who are available to do them. But I would say it would seem to be something that could be possibly done from notice to hearing things. It could maybe a 30-day period, perhaps.
Is there anything that we need or could change in our ordinance to shorten that, or is it all statutory?
It's statutory. I mean, our ordinance already gives us pretty much good flexibility as far as that issue.
Flexibility. I want it the least amount of time as possible.
It doesn't provide any time. Our ordinance doesn't establish any time periods. So in that respect, when I say flexibility as far as establishing the time periods, we are able to establish shorter time periods.
Okay, and then is there, this is under the nuisance ordinance, is there should we be in some other arena? Is the nuisance ordinance process the only place we can be? Is there another place to be that's better?
The only other ways to go when enforcing a county ordinance are either through this administrative process, a nuisance abatement process, or filing a civil action, or a criminal complaint.
Okay, I know that in a lot of some of our other areas, like you have an appeals board or something like that, for administrative review for different issues that come before the counties or the cities, and you can do a sort of an in-house thing. Can we go to some process like that, where we have an administrative review board that we have available to us on a much shorter basis than, or do we have to go through this other hearing process?
There's going to need to be a hearing. I mean, the person is entitled to be, if we're going to abate a violation of the county code, then there's going to have to be a notice and an opportunity to be heard.
And who's the hearing in front of?
Right now, the code says that it can either be the Board of Supervisors or a hearing officer that's been delegated by the board. And currently, the board has done that through another ordinance. And we've got 2 hearing officers who are currently under contract to do all of our nuisance abatement and code enforcement.
Okay, so just my final comments then, and we'll see where the board wants to go with this, but I agree with all the comments made. As my fellow supervisors have said, I get the same comments, the calls from one gentleman from Happy Valley. I get calls from Happy Valley, French Gulch, Igo, Illinois, all the time. It's people right next door. There's hundreds of people, I mean, around them that are growing it. It's the concern for the children that are walking by this or are dealing with this stuff. It is the quality of life, as Ms. Healy talked about, is that, you want to be able to enjoy your land, particularly if you live in a rural area, and the idea that you can't go outside and have your barbecue because you're smelling the smell from the 4 neighbors that are growing marijuana. Yeah, it would be very disturbing and very upsetting, and I understand that, and I think that, I agree. I think that, and it's what I've said all along from the very beginning, and I think my my colleagues have said the same concern, is that the whole Prop 215 was nothing but a farce to start with, quite frankly. And it was set up to start legalizing marijuana. And I will, and I've said before, if there's 3 or 4% of people out there who think that they truly get some benefit from medical marijuana, okay, I'll grant them that much. But quite frankly, it's the other 98% of them, or wherever it is, that are using it for nothing more than for getting high. And because they got, or we're hearing, I have a sore back, or I got, I got a sore back. My elbow hurts sometimes too, So they're using it as an excuse to use marijuana under the pretense that it's medical marijuana, and they're just, and it's destroying the lives and our type of lifestyle that we have in our community is making it very difficult for people to enjoy their properties. I truly agree we need to do something as, again, we are behind the 8 ball at this state and their decisions, and all the people who voted for this back in 1995 or 96. But whatever we can do to be more restrictive, I'm supportive of. Supervisor Kehoe.
Thank you, Chair Money. I share the comments of all of my colleagues here. I have 3 observations. Observation number 1, the 5 items that you've listed here are a great starting point, but I do not want us to leave this morning, this chambers, without setting a finite date for a report back to the board. And I'm asking you, when can you provide that report so that the folks in this room can join us again and we can have this comprehensive discussion? That's number 1.
I would look at doing that after, because I believe, and not being an expertise, because I believe we're nearing the end of the growing season. My intent is to have all this in place prior to any type of the beginning of a growing season. And so I would like to have everything in place by February or March. Now, what I'd like to do is come back in January, and why January is magic is because that's our mid-year budget. And that's when we'll be able to look at exactly how the revenue has come in, and I'll be able to get a better idea of where best to transfer funds and where we're going to be taking that from. So I'd like to be able to come back mid-January. And I think that still gives us plenty of time to get set up for the
Second or third meeting in January?
probably the second meeting of January.
Okay. So you have that, ladies and gentlemen. The second meeting in January, we're going to invite you all back to make comments. Second observation is, we've talked a bit about funding, and I think the observations have been on the mark, but my question of you, Sheriff Pasenko and Mr. Lees, is can we aggressively pursue additional state and federal funding for the eradication of these marijuana grows?
We can. I have had a number of meetings with our United States Attorney assigned to the Eastern District, Mr. Ben Wagner. I'll be meeting tomorrow with federal officials also in regards to this very topic to see if our federal partners can take a more assertive role in assisting us in addressing this problem. I know that our federal partners have taken that in the Central Valley, specifically the Fresno and Madera counties, although the federal partners here have not been as involved in the assisting of the actual medical marijuana that can spill over to violations of federal law. And there is a pretty high standards, and again, all government agencies are dealing with staffing issues, as well as the Eastern District for the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I believe that there is only 1 or 2 people assigned for the Eastern District, which is huge, to prosecute drug cases, everything from drug trafficking of large amounts of white powder to marijuana crimes as well.
Can we actively pursue funding for eradication on private land as well as public land?
Not likely. Most of the funding is for public lands, federal lands, and then the federal government, that would be the federal government stepping into the private sector, which I seriously doubt that they would do.
All right. Mr. Lees, after the election, can we set up some meetings with our representatives to impress upon them the seriousness of this problem in Shasta County and ask for an earmark for Shasta County?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay, and I have another question for Mr. Cruz. Part of the hearing process is they get a chance to come and, I guess, tell us why they're in compliance with the ordinance. That's the purpose of the ordinance. So if it's a residential grow, and we say that due to their lot size, it should be no more than 10 by 10 square feet, and they're arguing that it should be bigger. Well, the maximum it can be is 360 square feet, I believe. It's about 19 by 19 square feet. So couldn't we go in there and say, well, okay, you want to argue if it should be 10 by 10 or 10 by 15, but the maximum you can have, no matter how big your property is 19 by 19. Why can't we go in there and take our tape measure, mark out 19 by 19 square feet, and take everything else out? How are we hurting their due process if they're not allowed to have any more than that, no matter what they've got?
Because the way the statute is written and the ordinances are written is that we cannot basically do self-help except in very, very limited circumstances. There actually was a case involving Butte County where a deputy sheriff went to was responding to an issue concerning a medical marijuana grow, saw the amount that was available, and told the person, well, no, you've got to destroy X amount and leave the rest. No hearing, nothing else. That individual sued. The California Court of Appeal said that that person could make a lawsuit. I don't know how it actually resulted at the end of the day, but did say, no, he could make a claim that you violated his due process rights, which exposed Butte County to attorney's fees and damages. So the short answer as far as that goes is I would be very hesitant to sort of somehow bypass due process hearings that are available, given the potential liability exposure that may arise.
Those are the laws that we're facing. That's the problem we have in California. Supervisor Haas.
Well, I'm not so sure that we shouldn't talk to some neighboring counties too and get their help. I mean, the more of us that go into this, if we're going to be talking to state and federal officials, the more of us that are together, the more power we're going to garnish, I think, with some help, because they have the same problems we do, I know.
Supervisor Baugh.
Thank you, Chair Modi. Mr. Lees, I hope you're hearing what I'm hearing from every supervisor here, that I'm hearing a desire to push the envelope before we lose our neighborhoods. Not just be happy with status quo, but to push the envelope to find every available opportunity to regain some ground here.
I agree, and I know that Sheriff Pasenko has some additional comments.
Sheriff?
Thank you, Mr. Lees and Chairman Modi. Mr. Kehoe, to your thoughts about contacting our legislators, I have been in touch with our federal legislators as well as our state legislators on these issues. Oftentimes, earmarks are sometimes a four-letter word for them. I have been working on trying to gain additional funding for that, but it is usually met on falling on deaf ears to a degree. Then, of course, we know the problems that we have seen with the state budget as far as the lack of money and deficit spending. And Supervisor Hawes, you're absolutely correct with the neighboring counties. We have seen these exact same problems. I meet regularly both with the North State sheriffs and with our sheriffs statewide, and it is a problem, whether it be in Fresno County or right here in Shasta County. The Trinity County Sheriff has had a very significant issue of out-of-town and outside state people coming in to grow under the veil of medical marijuana. And Supervisor Modi, with his law enforcement background, he is absolutely right that originally, as it was billed, became a farce, that it was, as the way it was presented to voters. But it is the current law, and we do have to deal with that and try and address it as best we can. And that is correct. The conundrum is, you folks have dealt with countywide budget and my budget as well. And the conundrum is, where do we put the priorities? We know that there's burglaries occurring, other thefts, domestic violence, and we're limited in our patrol staff countywide, our investigative staff countywide for our detectives, and as well as support staff. It will take a lot of prioritization of that. In fact, just 2 deputies to address medical marijuana will need support staff and county council time, abatement funding to deal with these, much like Mr. Moll has for the abatement of junk within his department. But thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. Ms. Keel, no with it.
Well, I have one final observation relative to state and federal funding, but specifically federal funding. You know that the federal government provides subsidies to certain categories of commodities that are grown or not grown. They should provide assistance to counties that are under attack from this insidious wave of lawlessness that we're confronting. And I think we have to aggressively call it to their attention.
Thank you. I think we've all provided our comments, Mr. Lees, so you've got your direction that you were looking for?
I do, and it would actually, I think, would be better if there was a motion and a second to support the CEO's recommendations in going forward, as well as the additional comments that were made.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you all for coming today and waiting so long to get your chance to speak.
You know that.
That's the quote. We do have one more item on our agenda today.
It's going to be short.
Yeah. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Folks, if we could have you either take your conversations to the back, or we have a little more business to conduct. Okay, item R7, adopt a resolution receiving the Safety and Wellness Program Report. Ms. Schaefer.
Good morning. Michelle Schaefer, Director of Support Services. I won't take long. The only thing I did want to point out is that we've done such a fantastic job with our safety and our wellness program, the way we've combined it, that this year we saw a savings of $267,000 in workers' comp claims because of the success of the program. So that's the main thing I wanted to point out. At this time, I'll take any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Schaefer?
Yes.
Mr. Kehoe.
In looking at the resolution that you're preparing, you indicate that the Shasta County recognized a 6.31 injury frequency rate for all employees combined. You know, it would be extremely valuable to the board if you could take that figure and place it in a comparative environment.
Thank you very much. I normally put the state total on there, but we had been told that they had adjusted the state from 2010 to 2011. I was hoping to have 2011 this year. That's why I didn't put it. I don't have it today, but the 2010 rate was 7.2% for similar type environment.
So when you make this report next year, why don't you give us some sort of a 5 or a 10-year comparison of where we are?
Absolutely.
That's number one. Number two, can you display the VFR also? Vehicle frequency rates.
Sure. Vehicle accident?
Right.
Yes.
The other thing is, why does it take a resolution to disband a safety committee? It seems like an operational matter, and why does it take a resolution?
I'm actually going to ask County Council to answer that question.
Thank you. The rationale for the resolution is that prior to today's meeting, there were 2 prior resolutions by the board acknowledging the Wellness Safety Committee and providing it direction. And therefore, as such, since there have been prior resolutions to that effect, this just simply closes the loop in that regard.
So are you referring to resolutions 2010-036 and 2011-100? We were unable to locate a resolution of this board for 2008 that commissioned this. The observation is simply this. We ought to look for opportunities to simplify government, and having to come to the board to abolish a safety committee doesn't make too much sense to me.
Well, perhaps
And I understand your rationale. But in the future, let's simplify things.
Well, and I guess in the future, don't use resolutions to establish it to start with.
Yes.
Exactly.
And that's what we're
Supervisor
doing.
Baugh?
Well, did we in fact establish it by resolution only, or make a resolution acknowledging the work of? I don't have a resolution establishing it.
No, there isn't one.
There was a resolution providing direction to it, which, in effect, under the law, would be considered a type of establishment.
And actually, by the action we're taking today, it is simplifying it, and that's why we're asking you to take this action, so we can simplify it and not have to come back to the board.
And I think the point's been well made, so.
I'll move approval then.
It's been a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
A second. Any other discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to have our closed session announcement. We will have a meeting with legal counsel regarding a case with Revere John Selmo, and then with our agency labor negotiators to talk about negotiations with our employee organizations. The estimated time is an hour and a half. After closed session, we'll have any reportable action, if any, reported in open session. Mr. Hawes?
Yes, on the Anselmo case, I have a conflict of interest under Government Code Section 87100, so I will be recusing from that issue.
Okay. Then we are recessed to closed session, and then we're going to call to order shortly the Air Pollution Control Board.